Welcome to the Evolution Lab. I'm Matt Roberts, and my mission here is to guide and inspire you to optimize your health, performance, and longevity so that you can live your longest, strongest life as the fittest, healthiest, and most vital version of yourself. My guest today is Paul Magee. Paul is a sports therapist with 27 years of clinical experience who now specializes in the application of the latest bone scanning technology, EchoLight REMS. She conducts regularly for us with our clients at Evolution. Paul became an early adopter of this technology back in 2020, so now has years of experience scanning a broad population of patients with the mission of helping to prevent osteoporosis through early detection and positive lifestyle interventions. In this episode, Paul and I discuss the importance of bone health, testing methods, and prevention strategies. We talk about the limitations of DEXA and the advantages of REMS, as well as the general evolution of pain management technology. We also cover lifestyle interventions, nutrition, and the most optimal exercises for bone health, as well as the future of bone health testing and education around its importance. Paul shares his journey into bone screening and the inspirational story of his wife's success post-fracture to improving her bone density from osteoporotic to ever better levels through lifestyle changes and supplements without needing medication. So without further ado, I'll give you my conversation with Paul Magee. Paul, thanks for joining me to go through your specialist area, which is all things bones. And there's a whole background over your career and history and experiences that we're going to dive into in great detail as well. But today, we're going to look at really what is bone health, how do we test bone health, various versions of doing that, how someone getting information about bone health understands what they're being told, because that's always confusing as well. We cover off the fears of being tested for anything, bone health amongst those things, because bones are definitely one of those silent killers. If you don't understand what's going on, then it causes obviously a multitude of different problems, whether that's internal organ-based, postural-based, and so on and so on. It's a life-threatening condition if you're given a bone scan with poor health and no plan and solution. And the good news is today we'll discuss as well the solutions for what to do best. But first of all, more about you. How did you start training in the industry? You're a sports therapist by original trade. You've gone into doing work in the bone area more recently. But tell me the whole story.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'd love talking about bone health because from a personal perspective, as we'll dive into, from a family perspective, we've had such a success story, and it was such a necessary thing to go through. And our own personal journey has sort of led us to this point in terms of being able to help others. But I was a rugby player. I think I managed about 3 games at a time without a hospital visit. So I met many physios and sports therapists and massage therapists over my time. And I could probably give a fairly good treatment for certain injuries, long before I was actually qualified, because of all the rehab I'd been through with surgeries.
Inside out.
Yeah, completely. So I think a lot of that sort of inspired me to get into this arena, and it's an area that I really then enjoyed once I started into it. Never looked back really. And I've been, one of the things that came across me in, it was about 2003, was the technology for pain management. And it's a powerful type of TENS device, Interx therapy it's called, originally from Russia. And I sort of felt my career was sort of ready to try something new, work on something. And a patient of mine who'd had severe, he'd had paralysis from a neck injury and had severe muscle contracture following that for years. We used to treat him kind of a couple of hours twice a week just to control the contracture in his muscles, just so he could work and function. He'd been on a course that one of his therapists was running and had treatment from this device, had a couple of weeks of relief. And he said, "Paul, I never say this, but you've got to get into this." So that was my first sort of delving into medical devices and looking at technology.
How advanced was that bit of tech at that point compared to today's models of the same kind of thing? If you look at EMS type stuff, for example, was that quite basic tech at that point? Was it intensive? Was it good looking back at it?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing technology. And in terms of the actual sort of devices and technology themselves, not much has changed since then. What has changed is the science around it and understanding how it worked. and how best to use it. And actually that was part of my role. I went to work for the manufacturer in the US for 7 years, and that was my role, was to kind of work out how it worked, because if we want to modify the device, are we going to lose the secret sauce? Are we going to change it and make it worse? So we needed to understand the technology and what made it superior and effective in some of these difficult conditions. And I say that, it's fibromyalgia, complex regional pain syndrome, phantom limb pain, the type of conditions that would just be sort of the worst for most people. Say we don't have an option for this. This is untreatable. It's just a case of, kind of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy,
right,
and medication, and deep breathing and that kind of stuff. And we could really help people with some very, very difficult conditions. And that really inspired me to sort of progress and grow what I was doing with the technology to help more people than the 50 or so I could fit into my clinic hours, back where I was. So yeah, I spent 7 years working with that over in the US, which was an amazing experience, and got to travel all over the world and teach that therapy in different environments. And I probably learned more from our customers than I think I taught them. I was the expert in the device.
Yeah.
But, pain doctors in the military in the US, and hand therapists in Australia, and physiotherapists in professional golf and that kind of thing, teaching me how they used it in their environment and how it worked best, really gave me a kind of a knowledge of all these different areas that you could use it in. And that sort of fed back in 2012 when we came back to the UK. I set my clinic up again, and I wanted to treat patients then. I'd been teaching people for 7 years how to treat patients. But
it was while you were in Texas, your wife, Sarah, had a stress fracture while she was running. And I think, how old is she at that point in time? How old was
she? Was 42. So it's 2008. She was training for the London Marathon. And it was a 17-mile run, all on tarmac around a lake, and she started to get shin pain. I could hear the difference in her cadence. Her foot was slapping down a bit. I thought it was a biomechanical thing, that she just put too much force through it.
Yeah.
At that age, no help for it. Yes, you've got a stress fracture. It's because you've been running too much, so stop running. At no point were we given this sort of guidance to, that shouldn't really be happening to a 42-year-old. Why don't you, let's get you a bone scan and try and identify where you are. So we rested from that, or she rested from that, and carried on running, but not marathons. And it kind of, that kind of went to sleep, really. Until...
At that point, though, you went to your doctor with her, and there's no suggestion from the doctor. It might be from the doctor too. There was a bone issue. It's more just because literally saying it was just from the running. It was overdoing it. It was, I don't know, poor gait or poor shoes or something else, or just overdoing the full thing. No suggestion it's going to be a bone issue. No scanning at that point.
None at all. And there was no delving into. She had early menopause, which was starting round about then. There's bone health issues in her family, so there's genetic elements to that. And absolutely no guidance as to sort of those risk factors. And I think at that age, perimenopausally, that's when we should be really picking up on some of these risk factors to say, okay, well, let's just be careful, because you've got this risk factor, that risk factor. This is worth a preventative, scan.
Well, that's the thing with perimenopause. The problem in some senses with it is it can be such a long period of time, and the symptoms you get within it for a female can be the same as other things they might experience. They might get more tired. They might feel they're getting slightly, a bit of brain fog. Well, everyone gets a bit of that now and again. It's not unusual. So it can be a long period of time. So when the heavier symptoms start to kick in, for some but not all women, it becomes more apparent. But the damage is being done potentially with bone density pretty early on in that process. And we can come back to peak bone densities in life in a moment as well. But actually, your wife is a good example of someone who actually was a healthy, fit individual who was suffering a thing that would be dismissed as being just, well, you're just great because you're training, it's really good, but just allow it for a moment or two, and it'll go away and stretch some more, and that's it.
And that's all the guidance that we had, and no suggestion that was anything to potentially be concerned about.
Do you know that right now, the number of people who get tested in the UK having a DEXA, having one of these scans done as EchoLight? I mean, I'm guessing, I don't know the number, I'm guessing it's tiny.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's tiny. I'm not sure the number of DEXAs. I know, the figures are that there's an estimated 3 million people in the UK that have osteoporosis, and there are 500,000 or 520,000 fragility fractures per year. So that is 1 per minute every day of the year.
Vast. And to put that into context as well, in terms of those fractures, again, go back to this thing about dismissing the symptoms. A bit like your wife, going for a run, getting some shin splints, a bit of pain, okay, we'll kind of ease it off. falling and having that random fracture, breaking a finger, bashing an elbow, having a small crack. You assume this is why I just fell in a funny way. I landed in a certain position. I must have done that. And not thinking too hard about the fact that, well, maybe it's broken because there's some bone issues that are there. There's always, I hear a lot of people who are in their 40s, early 50s for sure, but 40s, who have this kind of, they stumble on the ground on some funny terrain, twist an ankle, turns out it's a small fracture to fibula, and it's a pain clearly, it's in the cast 6 weeks, but it's just one of those things I just slipped a certain way, but in reality, it's a sign of, actually, we need to look at your bone density and your bone health and that flexibility. Let's just, going back to that point about the reasons why it happens to some people more than others, there's a peak bone density point we get to for males and females, which is a staggeringly young age. It's in
25 to 30, 25 to 30 years old is the peak there, absolutely. And thereafter, it plateaus for a while. It's different in everybody. And then 30 to 40, it begins to go down at average about 1% per year. And then for women, it accelerates. The average loss during menopause is 1.9% per year. So you have that doubling of the bone degradation during menopause, and again, that's where when you reach that peak, if it's a bit lower than it should be, and another 10 years later, and then menopause or early menopause, and you don't really know you need to worry about your bones, and then you lose 2% a year, and that's an average. I've seen 3 or 4% a year in some patients.
Wow, massive, isn't it?
And so if you're 3 years in and it's going down 3 or 4% a year, and you were already low for whatever reason, whether it is sort of eating disorders younger, vitamin D deficiency, not doing sort of sport or having injuries even when you're younger, all of those things reduce that peak bone density. All of a sudden you're 2 or 3 years into menopause and there's a problem. Unfortunately, it's a silent problem, because unless you have a scan, you won't know about it. There aren't symptoms at that age until you have a fracture. And therein lies the problem.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. I think for people listening and watching this, I think to put it into some visual context, it's really, if your graph was 0 to 100 and your peak bone was at 100 when you're 25 years old, you peaked out and it gradually erodes away, gets weaker over time, and you can do work to try and clearly maintain that. It's still going to have some degradation over time anyway. You start at 100 and it drops down to, say, 90, 80, 70, and you're 65 years old and you're at 60. It's kind of a level at which there's going to be no real issues on your bones. If you only get to being a peak of about 40 or 50 when you're 25 years old, you're coming from a much lower platform.
Absolutely.
Out of the 10s and the 20s, where we could have in that index score a higher chance of that easy twist an ankle, break a fibula, fall over, break a little finger, those kind of things, and worse. Spinal fractures, curvature of spines, postural changes, squishing internal organs by spines being gradually eroded down. Nasty stuff. Killers, clearly. So this peak bone mass, bone density, is critical. So anyone listening who's male or female, but females who are in their 50s, have been given a scan, had a scan done, realised they're osteopenic, pre-osteoporotic, or they've got osteoporosis. There's obviously, we'll come on to the ways in which this is not a death sentence. We can help all that out. But I would really stress the point that if you have children, if you have daughters in particular, but actually males as well, and they're in their teen years and in their early 20s, this is when, as a parent in your 50s, 60s, you should be saying to them, you have to eat the right things. Don't eat the wrong things or drink the wrong things. Do the work that needs to be done to build the bone density, because this is your one chance in life to max out on bone density when you're in your late teens and 20s. And to your point about what people eat, missing out on certain nutritional elements, clearly calcium in the diet, pure quantity of calories for some people in the diet being missing, protein being present. These are all factors that impact upon peak bone mass being achieved in those early 20s years. And it's a really key point.
Absolutely. And vitamin D deficiency, living in Great Britain.
It's not the best.
There just isn't enough sun. And also, we've done a lot in recent years to protect ourselves from the sun. So most makeup has SPF in it. We've got clothes with SPF in it. Sunglasses and hat on if it's sunny outside, and all of that reduces. People say, "Oh, I've sat out in the sun," but they're in a long sleeve top and sunglasses, and that just stops your ability to produce vitamin D, and that's in the summer, let alone in the winter. And so I think that's a big driving factor as well in this country in terms of deficiencies, which a lot of people are learning, but the masses, haven't. And the only way to identify that it has been a problem for you is then to get a scan, because it's either have a scan or wait for a fracture in terms of learning your bone health.
As a measure of the vitamin D in this country, it's interesting. I mean, this year I did a little, just to test out like a guinea pig. I test myself out in these things to see what would happen with certain parameters. My parameters were test my blood test at the start of the summer, in springtime, March, April. And in that test, unsurprisingly, post-winter, my vitamin D levels were as 85% of all our tests that we do on people were low. So low vitamin D, post-winter, we get X hours a day of light outside, and we're actually inside anyway, so not converting any of that sunlight into usable vitamin D in the system. So clearly it was low. I took a 3,000 to 5,000 IU supplement every day. And each day when the sun was out in the summer, I made a real play on doing 20, 30 minutes of being in the sunlight, no sun cream on, critically, no SPF, to make sure it was direct sunlight. Ideally, it was shirt off, out and show, body it's exposed to the sunshine, face is not enough, got to be on the arms and on the chest and on the back and the legs ideally. And did that whenever the sun was out reasonably strongly, and be in the sun most days anyway, walking the dog or being out for a run, that kind of stuff. But particularly doing a structured program of about half an hour. And at the end of the summer, I tested again for vitamin D, and it was through the roof. So it took just that small amount, I'd say probably 4 days per week, getting half an hour of direct exposure with no SPF, no hat on, getting it onto the body, and it had a profound effect on the way in which I was able to build it up, absorb, and retain the vitamin D. But most people don't do it. And you're right about having SPF cream. Whilst it's great for sun, I'm very careful here, because obviously there's a benefit to having SPF in the cream so that you don't get skin cancer. But there's a downside of barriering, holding at bay that vitamin D production and conversion, which is crucial not just for the bones, but for testosterone as well, for our mood, our general sense of well-being. So we've got to change a bit of how we, not have habits, but how we actually construct our days to optimize certain parts of how we live and maximize it.
Absolutely. And you've demonstrated as well that a little bit of a change makes a big difference. And that's the thing. Bone health is about consistency in nutrition, in loading, in looking after them, like anything. Similar to looking after your skin from the sun even. You've got to do it every day to do it. If one big burn on your skin and it can damage it for a long period. It's consistently protection is going to help your skin, but you've got to be consistent with looking after your bones. And yet I think testing is really the only way to understand really where you are in terms of that. And I think it's a big part of the developmental side of it as well. With children and being outside and being out playing, kind of historically, I would have said that kids played outside more sort of 30 or 40 years ago than they do now. And that will have changed the impact of vitamin D or their ability to create vitamin D because of the sun. And that's different now. So we have to mitigate for that.
For sure. Speaking of testing, so the test that you do is the radioechographic multispectrometry, like REMS.
REMS.
There's DEXA as well, a dual energy X-ray absorptometry. So the DEXA is probably the one that's seen as being always the gold standard. It's perceived as being that. It's what everyone refers to. It's the one used by NHS referrals, I think. And it's seen as being the one that everyone knows. What's the difference between REMS and DEXA? If anyone listening to this and understanding which one to use and why, what's the main differentials? And are the differences in the efficacy of the result at all?
Well, the DEXA's been around now for about 40 years. It's the gold standard pretty much because it's been the only standard. But there's not been a huge development in it, and it's quite widely accepted that it can be open to user errors. There can be difficulties with user errors, and also with when patients have scoliosis or arthritis, there's inaccuracies. It can't deal with those kind of things. So it has limitations in that. And used scientifically in a research environment, it should be accurate because it's used properly, and any identification of anomalies or mistakes can be caught by a researcher. But in the real world, Messina et al. Did an article in 2015 and showed that 90% of DEXAs have errors.
Wow, really
90%, yeah.
By what degree of error, do you know?
I don't know the degree of error, but they have errors, and some are due to positioning of the patient, and some of the settings on the machine that are used for patients. Some it simply isn't able to cope with a severe scoliosis, and like I said, an arthritis as well. You get osteophytes, little bony spurs, and particularly in the vertebra with arthritis, and they are harder bone. They're greater calcification, and the DEXA takes all of that into account. And that can then overestimate the bone density as you become more arthritic. So REMS has been around in the UK for about 6 years now. It's produced by a company called EchoLight out in Italy. There's a lot of them over in Italy. Until just a few months ago, there was only a couple here in the UK. That's growing, thankfully, and there's more and more there. And it's an ultrasound technology. So there's no ionizing radiation. It's completely safe. There's no one you can't use it on, basically. And that opens up sort of opportunities in the future potentially to be able to scan children on a regular basis. They've done some research recently during pregnancy as well, which of course isn't you can't put an X-ray onto a pregnant woman.
Yeah.
And so that opens up a lot of that. But it matches up very well with DEXA. Used correctly, they should align quite well. So the reference data for REMS is DEXA data. But there are advantages to using REMS. It's a more advanced technology in terms of there is some AI in it. If you position it correctly, and you can see if you are, then it will analyze the section of bone that it's looking at, look at the region of interest, and then sample from there. So it can say exactly where we are. If I was to have the probe in the wrong position, so it doesn't look like it should on the screen, the machine will just give no result.
Well, so it's self-correcting to make sure you get the right area,
Absolutely.
the right location, the right result.
Absolutely.
So someone listening to this and watching this, they're going to be coming in, they lay down. There are, how many sites are being tested?
Typically 2, the spine and one of the hips. You can do both hips, but unless someone's had a significant injury or has been non-ambulatory on one of the legs, then pretty much you're going to load both hips the same. So one hip and the lumbar spine.
As opposed to a DEXA, which then covers, DEXA covers the whole body in various ways, of course, doesn't it?
Yeah, it varies. You can do different sites with DEXA. Some just do the spine and the hips, some do full body, some do different parts of the body specifically as well. So the REMS matches up well with a DEXA that does spine and hip, and they're called the axial sites, and they're the more important ones that if you have a fracture, if you have a wrist fracture or an ankle fracture, no matter what our age, in cast for a little bit, you get repaired, you see a physio, you do your rehabilitation, you're on your way. Whereas if you fracture a hip or you fracture the spine, then it's a life-changing injury. So those are the most important sites to look after, and they're the ones we look at.
Is REMS taking over there? Will REMS take over from DEXA as being the gold standard thing? So clearly, I think it's more accurate, and also does other things too, in the sense it's not just looking at one parameter.
Yeah,
looking at that bone health instead as well, some of that fragility score.
Yeah, some of the precision on it, I think, certainly some of the research shows we're able to measure smaller increments of change, so short-term measurements are better and possible, and because there's no radiation, that means that's it's safe to scan more regularly and preventatively. But we also it has the fragility score, so it looks at the microarchitecture of the bone, and the inside the microarchitecture creates the strength of the bone. Some estimates I was reading recently is 10 to 30% of the strength of the bone is down to the microarchitecture, not the density. So if you're only looking at the density, you're only looking at around about 70% of the strength of the bone. So the microarchitecture is absolutely critical to that, and the REMS can assess it. So it looks at the echographic noise coming back from the inside of the bone. It comes back as a signature graph, really, of what it looks like. And we have a reference data from a population of patients that have had fragility fractures, so their bones are considered to be frail, and a population of patients with no fragility fractures, so their bones are considered to be strong. And they have different readings come back from it. And when we scan a patient, it then looks at those readings and rates them from 0 to 100. Are you more like strong bones that haven't had a fracture, or do the characteristics of the inside of your bones look more like bones that are frail? And it rates you from 0 to 100. So a low score indicates a stronger bone, and a lower fragility score.
I think we're missing out on understanding that after getting a DEXA done. Obviously, that's one missing thing that's not being looked at and being spoken about. So you have this kind of ability to have a strongish bone, but if the microarchitecture is not very good, then they might think they're fine, but not actually be fine, and have a higher risk of which fracture? I mean, I guess more stress fracturing if the microarchitecture is not there, or is it just general?
Any fractures, yeah. In fact, the research into it has shown that the fragility score is actually a better predictor of fracture risk than both bone density with REMS and bone density with DEXA. So it's the superior score in terms of accuracy. So it may be in the future that the only thing we look at in terms of bone health is the fragility score and not the density, because density can vary a little bit more, and you can have people that have lower density but quite strong bones. The inside of the bones look really healthy and strong, and likewise you can have people that have fairly good density but the microarchitecture really doesn't look good at all, and they're at higher risk.
Is that microarchitecture something which is linked into anything specific? Is it a case of there are things that are being done with medication? Is it the genetic side of things that makes the biggest difference to that? Do we know a correlation between anything with that area, or is it just a randomized event?
It's certainly health is part of it.
General health overall,
general health in terms of nutrition and loading as well. You know, the ones that I see that have a lower bone density but a really good fragility score are often someone that's not been able to absorb the calcium for whatever reason. They may be celiac, they may be, they don't eat very much, they've exercised a lot. You know, you see that in some of the athletes. So they have lower calcium in their bones, the density is lower, but their fragility score is amazing. So it shows the microarchitecture, what the bone has done with the calcium once it's arrived there and created a strong structure inside is good. And I see that with some patients as well. They come to me and they say, well, I've just been diagnosed with osteoporosis, but I fell over last week and I smashed into a rock and I didn't break anything. Like, what's going on? And then
it's really good to know, isn't it? Because I think people really get bogged down in this. I think people get clearly very concerned over being given a score that's a bad score by DEXA. So understanding the way in which your bone is very unique to you, how the health of the bone is the most important part, and it can be very resilient, even with a score that's seen as being maybe osteopenic effectively, or even osteoporotic, can still be okay. I know Dr. Tahir Mahmood, I mean, his point always with bone health is very much that while you have a bone score that may be seen as being negative, but you're not having a problem with it, as in you aren't falling and breaking anything, or you aren't losing height, then at the moment it's actually sort of okay. You're under control. It's the point at which things are happening where clearly we need to worry about it. Understanding the reasons why, to your point really of just this person who smashed into a rock and didn't actually break anything, it shows that you can get these bad scores, but you're kind of okay.
Yeah.
And then you have to question then the points at which someone is being told to take medication, maybe unnecessarily. Could be a diagnosis which looks like it's bad, but in reality they're okay. It could be ways to do lifestyle changes instead, rather than medication or alongside. So it's really tough areas. The EchoLight approach to doing the testing, the REMS approach, gives that a bit more information, a bit more detail, the understanding by someone like yourself to understand you're actually going to benefit from doing lifestyle involvement and changes, or refer at the worst point to then an expert to then intervene medication.
Yeah. And the opposite of that is true as well. You might have someone who is osteopenic and they think, oh, I'm okay, I don't need to worry about it. And their fragility score is quite poor and they have poor health in their bones, and that puts them at significantly greater risk. And there's more that needs to be done then. So it really is a balance between those. And I think having that extra piece of information just informs, where you are. Your bone density is sort of low osteopenia towards osteoporotic, but can you do this weight training, conditioning program to build my bones? Am I strong enough? And I would say sort of looking at the fragility score on people's scans will inform you as to which way you should go with that, whether you take great caution with it, or actually, the fact you fell off your bike yesterday and didn't break anything shows you're really strong. Let's get going with, with exercise to build on that. And it's a very valuable tool.
There's some really obvious points in life where people tend to suffer with changes in bone density. You've touched on one with menopause already, perimenopause, menopause. Aging in general has a degradation of the bone quality over time. We just have to face all of that. And alongside that, there are certain points in life, high stress points that have a generalized effect on the body, highly inflammatory, habitual changes, could be more drinking, could be taking drugs in the worst cases, which have an impact on our general health and therefore on the bones as well. But it's seen always as being bone health, bone issues, as being a female issue, probably 50 plus, and some slightly younger, but it's around that kind of age category, and they're the people. But we know from a whole bunch of research out there about people who are young, 20s, healthy, super fit, training very hard. And we know from testing we've done actually on even some of my own team, I hate me to say it, but some of my own team, getting scores of bone density, guys in their mid-20s who were runners or cyclists, who were training super hard and borderline and osteopenic. So they've got this bone loss already at a young age. We never expect it, and they're doing the training and they're doing the work and they're eating. Is that just because they are not keeping up with demand mainly? Is it a case of it's a certain form of overtraining, not being able to absorb enough calcium, leaching off too much? What's going on with that?
Certainly, kind of training and getting the balance of nutrition is critical. I think we were talking sort of, with Nikki Key, I think you sort of talked to, and she's an
specialist.
And also specialising in relative energy deficiency from sport, Red S, and looking at the impact of, essentially, an athlete who's burning 5,000 calories a day and eating 3,000 calories a day is the same as someone who's burning 2,500 calories a day, eating 500 calories a day. And that the body has to get stuff from somewhere, and it leaches calcium from the bones. And so you can, if you're undernourished for the exercise, what seems like a healthy person in terms of their sort of appetite and the amount they eat even, just isn't eating enough for the exercise they do. And it's a classic thing with professional cyclists, if they're not performing or they plateau, the first thing they do is try and lose a little bit of weight. Lose a little bit of weight, they go a bit quicker, they think this is great, I'll lose a bit more. And then they plateau again, and then their performance drops off a cliff. And then you've got the risk of causing significant damage to your bones, particularly with cycling, when you're talking about it's not loading, no impact loading, which is critical for increasing bone health. But yes, I mean, it's, half of women over 50 will have a fracture from osteoporosis. 1 in 5 men will. So it's a big number. It's a big number as well, and it's important that men do have higher bone density. When I scan a man who's slightly below average, I sort of look it out and go, well, you'd be about 90 years old before you got to worry about it potentially, even though you're below average. But you don't know what's going to happen to them in between then. And I think you're right. Stress is a big part, because that drives other lifestyle things as well. If someone's really stressed in their work, I bet they're sitting in a chair for 10 hours a day or more. And they're probably sitting on a train seat for another couple of hours to get there. I bet they go home and have a glass of wine and wonder, where they went wrong in life and what they're going to deal with it tomorrow.
And they're inside all day. There's no sunlight. It's all those factors.
And they haven't got time to go to the gym. And so immediately you've got that sort of habit of poor, from a bone perspective, poor health, as you say, inside, not loading, poor nutrition. And immediately then the consistency of work being 5 days a week or more for some people, it just makes a little bit of a difference every day. And then years down the line of this, you've then got someone who has a problem, which again is silent, because until you have a scan to look at your bone health, you won't know it's happening. And then it could be a fall on a ski trip, or tripping over, when you're out tobogganing with the kids or something like that, and suddenly you've got a major fracture and you think, how did this happen to me? And you look back at the history and go, well, you probably had healthy bones when you were 30, but the last 20 years of this stressful job and the lifestyle you've led since then has brought you to this position.
And that's the point. It's a slow ticking bomb, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not a rapid degradation, apart from maybe a few key points in life, like a menopause. It is that gradual leaching away, and until that point when suddenly, bang, you're confronting the issue, which is definitely right there.
Exactly. And that's why the priority is to find early, because, it's 1% loss a year for menopause. For women, it's about 2%. But you can still, there's interventions, there's some supplements that have shown one average of 1% increase per year. There was an algae source calcium supplement that showed over 7 years in postmenopausal women, an average of 7% increase in 7 years.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's wonderful. It's a simple approach to do it. And you've got, right down to the basics of 50 hops a day, 5 days a week, significantly better than 3 days a week. Again, 1% a year. And we look at some of the, the equipment that you've got at Evolution, in terms of the biodensity and the lift more work that you're doing, 3, 4, 5, 10% changes in bone density with that. All of these can be done, but having stronger bones and doing it earlier can make that difference. But that 1% leach per year really adds up if you don't take action.
Yeah, you're right. We have the biodensity machine, which is an amazing bit of kit actually, because it's something that one of the issues people confront with trying to build bone density up, and we'll come on to how to actually build that in a second, is getting to the point where someone can do enough loading, enough of a high intensity to create the bone mass required. It's so high that that's great, it can be done. But if someone's just starting off in this program and they're 55 years old, female, postmenopausal, getting to that level will take time. It takes maybe a year of training gradually and development, and that's all fine. All that stuff has a benefit. It all stabilizes the bone loss along the way. And to create that extra density is hard. The biodensity machine itself, it loads for this 5-second loading. It looks a bit like a leg press machine in the gym. It's got some things you can pull on with your arms as well. There are 4 key exercises that it does. People can have in their mind how it looks. And it produces a loading which is around 4 times body weight in this 5-second loaded period, which you could never really do if you're deconditioned. You could never do without having great form in doing a deadlift or a back squat, front squat. It's really hard to do. If you're used to go to the gym, it's fine. But if you aren't, getting to that point is tricky. So the biodensity sort of shortcuts parts to get that growth that's there. And like all these things, it takes a bit of patience. Bone is slow to lose, but also slow to gain. So taking supplements, taking the calcium-based algae sounds great for this kind of really interesting growth that's in there, because I think that people can make diet changes too, and diet changes are very important. It does take more than just diet changes. It does take loading. It does take supplementation in most cases. So what should people take then? Actually, it's good to kind of touch on that right now. Is this calcium algae sounds great?
Yeah, and the mix within that is calcium, magnesium, boron, vitamin D, and vitamin K2. It's a fairly simple mix in terms of that. And what I like about it is the evidence-based approach to it. And what I say to some of my patients is, if you don't want to take a supplement, that's great. Here's a whole list of foods with all of those things in and how much there is. Let's do an analysis of your diet. Let's look at the vitamins that are in your diet, whether it's 1 day, a week, a month. Let's average it out. Let's look at where you're missing some of those things, and we can recreate, what's going in with that supplement, because we know evidence-based that should get you there. And then we can implement it, whether supplementation or with food. I've done a few recently where, I thought, well, they're probably under eating and maybe they haven't got this, and they had everything except 93% less vitamin D than they should have.
Right.
Huge difference. And it was kind of like you don't need anything else other than vitamin D in your diet based upon what we've just looked at. And you've got to analyze those things to really understand where someone is.
That's why blood testing is so important. That's what, again, it's been a missing link in all these aspects is you can't know where you are unless you know where you are. You've got to be able to do the testing, whether it's the bone testing, blood testing. You've got to make sure we know exactly what's going on. And I think that, the medical profession on the NHS side, they, despite being hugely funded, are pressed to do this kind of work. They aren't going to go into detail unless you've probably had multiple fractures over time. So they do dismiss away because you're fundamentally, asking for a blood test takes asking for a blood test. But blood testing, it's the critical thing to make sure we know where all those elements are and see which bits are missing. It's just one simple thing. The vitamin D, for example, well, when you can, the sun can be right there. When you need to, most days, take a supplementation without question. I think everyone should be taking it every day, vitamin D, all year round, irrespective of the sun or the dark. We need to have it because we're inside anyway. So the blood testing is crucial for most people. So it's worth spending for anyone. What now is quite a small amount to spend on a blood test to get someone to analyze that bit of data. I know sometimes these things seem like a big amount of money, but actually doing that kind of work, not often, once every year, for most people is probably enough to actually see what's going on, make some changes twice a year, maybe for some people who get really into it and give the full Brian Johnson approach of testing most days in your blood. You can do, wouldn't advise it, but you can do that sort of thing. But then you'll know where you are and you can see what's going on within changes in your blood, changes in what you're absorbing from what you're eating, and then tweak it and take special advice where need be beyond that point.
And that's it as well, because if your nutritional sort of tracking shows you're taking everything in, and your blood test shows you've got nothing in, then something else is causing that.
Quite.
And that's where there may be medical conditions that are limiting your ability to absorb that nutrition. And so it's not just about what goes in, it's about what stays in. And that's where the blood testing gives you that. If you've got everything in and you're putting everything in, that's great. But if there isn't, then there's more medical testing then that can be necessary. Parathyroid, for instance, is a classic one in terms of that. And, it's important to be able to understand why things are happening from your bone density perspective, but someone may be celiac and not know, or they may have an intolerance or whatever that they don't know about until they have that, or inflammatory conditions that limit their ability to absorb nutrition. So all of those medical tests that relate to bone density can be critical if we're sort of like, okay, that now explains why your bone density is down. You're putting everything in right, but it's your bone density is down here. We need to bring it up.
Yeah, I think people really struggle with, the problem for most people, of course, is getting all that data information is who then takes it, who analyzes that, who can tell you the answer. And it's tough, actually. There's so much data that you can look at, but actually you're almost on your own trying to interpret what's what. And should you take medication? Is it supplementation? Is it dietary changes? Is it lifestyle changes? Mm-hmm. Is it how you sleep? And so on and so on and so on and so on. And what we try and do in Evolution is we have the people who can analyze and do assess, and a group of experts across a wide panel, yourself included, and Nikki doing the hormone work, and Nicola, our dietitian, and Sophie, our gut expert, Simon, the physio. It goes on and on.
Yeah.
To say, right, we've got all these bits that are here, put together. But in fairness, it takes cost and it takes time. And it is a missing area within public service care, health, that there's not enough detailing within that. And it's why scanning in certain ways, if it could be made available, would be an amazing thing. It'll get there in time. It'll happen. I wish there was a bit of reallocation of resources, because prevention would cost the NHS much less than curing constantly.
Yeah. Current estimated cost is £6 billion a year for those 500,000 fragility fractures. It's huge. It's about £12,000 per fracture. I think that works out as in terms of the care needed. And so, prevention with seeing a nutritionist, a dietitian, a physiotherapist, loading, whatever's necessary. Most of those fragility fractures are preventable if action is taken early enough. And that's the simple fact. You can build bones naturally with lifestyle, nutritional and exercise interventions, but they have to start early enough.
So someone's had the scan done, and if you go through the scale of what you receive as information, you are normal at a score of 0, effectively in the bone strength density. Your 0 to -1 is kind of normal range. -1 to -2 is osteopenic.
-1 to -2.5.
2.5 and beyond, -2.5
is
osteoporosis.
Yeah.
So if someone gets a diagnosis of being borderline osteopenic to osteoporotic, they're in that kind of -2.5 zone. And we're saying, this is what you've got, this is what's happened, it's not the end of the world, this is what we're going to do. The next phases would be, we need to know the fragility score, you're going to have that as well.
Yeah.
Assuming they are medium grade on the fragility, so they're sort of okay and fine, got to deal with now with osteopenic. Mm-hmm. What's the steps to take on the exercise side? What's the loading we need to try and apply? What's the frequency of loading ideally per week? And then if we assume those things are being done, what percentage growth back can they expect to come back from -2.5 to what over 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months? What's the kind of the reasonable expectation to go for?
Gosh, that's a lot of questions.
I know it is.
How long we got?
We've got ages.
It is patient specific, because if you've got someone, let's say, who's a -2.3, so they're fairly well down into osteopenic, but they're 40 years old, and there may be some medical tests necessary, because that's significantly below average, to understand why that is the case. If there isn't a patient history that sort of describes it, maybe of a eating disorder, or specific family history, or they've had sort of chemotherapy, for instance, for cancer treatment, that kind of thing. If it doesn't make sense where they are, it may require tests to then be able to go forward. But nutritional is certainly one of them straight away to do that. And then it also depends on their access to resources. So it can range in terms of the exercise, from my perspective. the simplest I say to people, it's 50 hops on each leg, 5 days a week, has been shown to be more effective than 3 days.
50 hops each side, 5 days a week. That's it.
And you can potentially get up to 1% increase per year. Considering that you get a 1% loss per year as normal, that's a 2% net gain. But if you build that into your workouts that you do, every time you go for a walk, you hop a little bit, and you put it in there every day, then you're there. Then you build it up to a greater program with it. Nikki Key did some research in professional cyclists, and they were looking at kind of multi-directional hopping with lunge jumps, and there's heel slams, plank, side plank, different exercise, and that got more significant, bone growth with that. Over the period of the study. Step it up further, you look at the sort of lift more approach, the heavy lifting, 5 sets of 5 reps of 4 exercises with a little bit of impact coming from one of those. You're looking at, I think it was 3% increase in spine bone density in 8 months with that. And
that's 5 reps, 5 sets, 5 reps. Obviously, it's high intensity to get to that 5 rep maximum. So be listening to understand it's 5 times 5, not just do 5 times 5. It's loaded heavily, isn't it?
That's it. It's heavy resistance. So the study protocol was 85% of 1 rep max, which for some, if you're not initiated in the gym and don't lift heavy, that's quite difficult to achieve. Yeah. I did see a slightly different approach, which sort of ends up in the same way, which was that it should be your 6 rep max, i.e. if you can do 7 reps, then add a bit of weight and do 5 reps of it. Yeah. And I quite like that approach, because if you're doing a foundation course for 6 to 8 weeks, introducing someone into the gym, it's a deadlift, a back squat, a shoulder press, and it's kind of a jumping pull-up, sort of assisted pull-up, and then letting yourself down for impact. But most people who haven't been to the gym have never done a deadlift or a back squat.
No, quite.
But you can start off with 15 reps and a light weight on your first session, just with the bar, and get the technique, and then gradually you can add weight until they go, oh, that's 6 rep, I can't do any more, and suddenly you've found your 6 rep max, and they never have to do a 1 rep max to achieve that, the correct weight for that.
And all the
that
time
study.
We're kind of slowing down degradation before getting to the build point anyway. That's
it. Every single rep is building them towards that sort of bone growth as well. And then you've got the biodensity. There's some studies ranging up to 15% improvements in a year, some 10, 11%, and everyone's different with it, because it requires, you're not lifting a certain weight with that. It's the force that you're creating. So stronger people, arguably, could create greater force and therefore have greater growth. So you've got to build the strength in patients to get. So I think there's quite a broad range of results with that because of it. And then I suppose underneath that, if someone is in that sort of minus 2.7, even minus 3 range, and possibly even with a poor fragility score, at that point it's a case of, okay, I don't know if it's safe to do some of these heavy lifting exercises or impact. And one of the things I recommend is a low intensity vibration device, Maradyne, and that is used 10 minutes twice a day or 5 minutes twice a day. And the vibration has been shown to improve bone density, or at least stop loss. I've had a patient who's increased hers by 13.9% in 3 years.
Just using that one
Just
thing.
Using that and some nutritional supplementation.
This is a power plate type device, isn't it?
It's lower than that. It's lower vibration.
Really well.
Yeah, it's low intensity vibration. So it's much, much lower than the power plates that are there. But if someone has stronger bone density, then I'd use the power plate to build their bones even further. So as you go down in that sort of strength of bone, you have to be a bit more gentle in the approach. And you're running out of options as well at that stage. And that's why it's so important. The earlier you are into finding out your bone density is below average, you've got more options available to you. You can you're stronger, so you can lift more, so you can push harder, you can use heavier, stronger vibration. And those are all implemented. But it's not just about bone density. Falling is the biggest cause of fractures. Balance is critical. And so this is where it's important not just to be focused on, getting a scan better, getting your DEXA scan better by, doing this one thing, or taking this drug and having that vitamin D and calcium, and then my scan got better and I didn't do anything else. Because how does that stop you falling over?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And it's important, and I think some of the tools you've got available to you, the power plate has been shown to improve stability and balance. You've got the biodensity, there's up to 50% increases in strength with a program of that, 8-month program of that. And then you've got the bone density improvements with it. And you've got that trio of things that are kind of ring fencing fracture risk, because ultimately it's the fracture that we want to stop.
Quite.
We'd like to get bone density up, but if we could get your balance better and get you stronger,
risk out of the way.
Exactly. So you've got that. If your balance is better, you're less likely to fall. If you do fall and you're stronger, you'll be better at catching yourself so you don't fall. If your bone density is better and you have fallen, then your body will take more impact and you'll be protected. And it's critical to look at it as a holistic approach to it to do that. And I think that's the great thing that we've got with the power plate, the biodensity and the EchoLight together to be able to bring that forth and work all of those things.
The really good point. It is critical. I know with working with clients that my training team work with alongside all of this work as well, is a lot of work they do anyway. Because our goal as a company is, even though we are best known for personal training and getting to be fitter and losing weight and so on, we have for many years been, and are more so now than ever, we're a health span company. Mm-hmm. And all these parts of the equation, bone's key within it, are just that, parts of the equation and the jigsaw that make up someone's ability to live for longer. Now, you can't live for longer. If you fall, break a hip, and you're immobile, and your chance of dying in the first year above the age of 65 goes up by X percentage, it's high.
Yeah.
So it's all about doing lots of work, and the training team lots of work in mobility, strength mobility. It's functional training work. It's getting the body to be able to do all those movement patterns that allow you to be able to, if you trip, you can catch yourself.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It is that one thing. It's why ideally continuously playing sports like tennis from the age of being 30-something through to being 70-something would help you enormously, because that coordination gain, that movement, consistency is all helpful. Most people just don't do that, of course.
That's right.
So we tend to become more static as time goes by, more time inside, more time in a chair. It's a shock to people how uncoordinated they become when they thought that they were, because they used to be. How immobile they become because they thought they used to be flexible and now they're not. And then suddenly you are a big trip risk.
That's
and
right.
You are a big trip hazard. So it's a real problem. And yes, so working on those things for sure. And things like the power plate are funny. You can dust them down at home because they've been there for a while. They're actually quite useful in certain settings to make sure you get that response and get that nervous activity and get that muscular response alongside the strength work, and make sure you've got that developed and get the bones in to get the stress that they need. So there's a few prongs to it. There's a lot to get done.
Absolutely. And it isn't just one thing. And I think that's the important, you have to go there. And there's options, as I said, even like with the low intensity vibration as being an option for someone who can't do those other things. It can be as simple as taking up Tai Chi when you're 75 can be your balance thing. To actually spend time balancing on one foot while moving around is huge in terms of reducing your fracture risk, if nothing else happened to your bone density or strength or anything else. So it's important to do all of that, because even people with fairly strong bones, if you have a big tumble, you've still got a chance of breaking something.
Going full circle back to your wife, 2008 she had her first stress fracture. Actually another one then in my notes here, 11 years later.
That's right, yeah.
Running similar distance to the previous one. What was, from memory, what was her score on bone density when she first was scanned? And what year was that the first scan was done?
We first scanned her, actually the first recorded one I've got is 2020. She had one done in 2019 when we were looking at the technology to buy in my clinic. And I sort of, this was after the fracture. We've had the second fracture, and a doctor said, you know, there's a problem here. We need to maybe book you in for a scan, that kind of thing. And we had EchoLight come over. And I said, right, Sarah, you're up first. And I sort of primed her. I said, this could be interesting, because you've had 2 fractures now, and you shouldn't, given your level of fitness and strength and so on. So let's look at it. And then, she was minus 2.6. So she was in the osteoporotic range at 53 years old.
And that's 2019, 2020. So having gone through that, got the scan done, instanced 11 years prior. In the 4 years since then, how's she progressed on? What's the work that she's done? Where is she now?
Yeah, so her spine has gone up by 7.5%, I think, is it? 7.5%, and 4.5% in her No, hold on, it's a 9%. 9% in her spine. Sorry. I've had so many different ones I've been talking about today. 9% in her spine and 4.5% in her hip. And so, you'd expect a 1% degradation in each of those per year. So over that 4-year period, that 9% is a 13% net gain, and the 4.5% is a 8.5%, 9% net gain that we've got then. And she is now in the yellow. She's comfortably in the yellow. So the spine now, I think she's a minus 1.8, something like that.
Great.
So she's really got into the yellow there.
Big difference.
I estimate if she carries on at this rate, she'll be average for her age in 2 years. So that will have been sort of 6 years from going almost at the bottom sort of 5 percentile of bone density for her age to being average in that period. The hip's going to take a bit longer, but it's all progressing on further. And she was able to run the London Marathon this year and didn't get a fracture. And so she had a 20-mile training run, leading up to that, and the 26-mile run that she did for the race, all on tarmac, obviously.
So she's doing all the things she wants to do. She's not curtailing her lifestyle by having that diagnosis. She's doing the work that needs to be done to improve it. And that's mainly on just interventions on the exercise side, dietary side.
Yeah, dietary side. She would often run fasted. She just prefers to run and not eat, but busy working lifestyle. She'll get home and she'll take the dog for a quick walk, and then she'll do some emails, and then she'll have a shower, and then she'll come down and do more emails, and suddenly it's 11:45. She went for a run at 8 in the morning. She hasn't had breakfast yet. So that, I think, is common in a lot of people in terms of that. And that just happens to be one of the things that I believe has been impacting her. And so she's much better now about eating before a run, just even if it's just a couple of bites of something, and then having breakfast as soon as she can after she runs. And she runs 5 or 6 days a week. So she does a lot of activity. So that part has improved. The algae source calcium she's been taking, and impact exercise, kind of multi-directional hopping. And all of that has been done, in with the simplicity of that.
Medication free, doing lifestyle changes, interventions, diet change, all just that alone. And that's got like really good growth back in the bone
Absolutely.
density. She's probably quite classic of people listening to this, frankly. That sort of phase of life where this is what's going on. And what they want to really know and understand is, how do I go about this? And do I take medication? Do I not take medication? There are downsides to medication, clearly. There will be upsides as well. And it's a real, again, it's a minefield to understand what to actually go about and do.
Yeah.
If you can do it on a natural basis, natural interventions, exercise changes, diet changes, clearly a better place to be. So to hear that she's doing that with that approach is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's taken control of it. And I think it's been interesting as part of that journey as well, because how she felt when she had that scan. She was kind of sitting there going, oh, well, this will be interesting. And then absolutely fear hit to see everything in the red. Probably the only thing worse than that is having a fracture at that age and then finding out, from a scan afterwards. But she was petrified. What can I, I'm going to have to stop doing this. I won't be able to do that. And I think having all of the things available, giving patients hope, having, looking at the science and everything that's there to say, okay, we've got you. Like there are things you can do. We can build on this. The science is behind you. The technology is behind you. We can build your bones. We can get you stronger. You can run. You can do all the things you want. It takes time and it takes consistency, but it's there. And I think that's an important part of this as well, because people are lost. People kind of just, oh, my nan's got, osteoporosis, and I think my mum's, she's lost about 3 inches of height. I'm going to be like that. And people spend literally decades worrying about their bone density and not doing something about it and not finding out about it. And I see quite a lot just burst out into tears when they get the scan and their bones are good, because they've spent so long, they've spent so long worrying about it. But then, the fear comes in with people that it's lower than it should be. And you have to give them hope, and you have to show them, what's the pathway out of it. And I think that's why success stories, and I can't wait to hear some of the success stories from you when you've, had patients go through an 8-month, 10-month cycle of the biodensity and the Liftmore study as well, to be able to scan them again and show, look, you've lifted yourself out of that red and into the yellow. And it's looking good.
It's it's great to hear that your wife's done so well, because actually it does give people great hope to understand there's a great route through. It's a really, really good thing to do on a client basis, but it's a really worthwhile thing on a bigger basis than that, actually, to understand, have people understand bone density, understand what they can do, and hope is definitely there. It's not some sort of death sentence. It really has got good hope, and there is good growth. The idea that you can't reverse and go into bone growth is untrue. You absolutely 100% can.
Science says so.
It's all right there. And it's something that I get asked by journalists constantly. You can't grow bones, can you? So yeah, of course you can. 100% you can. All the research, all the science is right there to say you can now for sure. It takes work, it takes input, but it does get there. And I hope you're listening will now think about getting a bone scan done critically. Then come and see you, of course, in Evolution at my clubs. And where else can they find you? Where's best to find you to come and get scans done elsewhere?
Well, I'm in Amersham, Buckinghamshire, just outside of London, and I come in once a month to your place as well. And but there's a company just been launched. It's had a kind of a soft launch, really sort of pushing on next year, called Screen My Bones, and that's been set up. And I'm part of that. I'm going to be one of
setup,
I'm going to be one of their scanning centres, or I am one of their scanning centres. I'm hoping to do some teaching for them as well for new users. I would really love to get more people in the UK doing REMS. They're opening more centres around. I know they're doing pop-up clinics with MBST UK, which is a magnetic resonance treatment for it. They're down in Cardiff at their House of Human Potential with Dr. Ben Matthew down there doing pop-up clinics. They have a biodensity as well. They're elsewhere in London, and all of that is growing. And what they're creating is a community that's talking about bones. And I think that's going to really grow. They're going to have not only celebrities sort of saying, this is a conversation we need to have. 20 years ago, no one was talking about menopause. And now no one's talking about bone density, but they will, and they are linked. So I think the growth of that and the propagation, they're going to build a network of doctors and specialists, physiotherapists, personal trainers, gyms, outlets, scanning centers, and information that people will be able to go to that and go, okay, I've found my place. I've found the information I need. I'm not getting this, so I need that doctor there. I'm not getting this, I need that personal trainer there. And I think Screen My Bones is really going to sort of bring this up and make the noise a lot louder about bone health, about EchoLight, about biodensity, about the Lift More approach. There's so much more that can be done. I think all of that's what's necessary to really help patients more is the education side of things. You just don't hear about it.
For sure. Paul, taking up lots of your time. Thank you. It's been really fascinating, and it's great working with you in the clubs with our clients as well, and more of the same going forwards. And it's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure as well. It's fabulous being at your centre. I love all the guys there, really good, and I really enjoy helping the patients. It's to be able to scan there is brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today in the Evolution Lab. I hope you're able to take some great information and inspiration from our discussion. And while we love creating motivational and moving content for you, what I'd love for you to do now is take from today's episode what felt most relevant to you and apply it. And if you need help with that, or simply want to let me know what you thought of the show, please do reach out. You can connect with me and my team on social media simply by searching for my name or the handles @MattRobertsEvolution or @MattRobertsPT. Alternatively, head to my website, mattroberts.co.uk, where you can find out about the work we're doing at Evolution and get even more info about the show. If you found this episode valuable, I'd really appreciate it if you can take a moment to subscribe and let us know what you think about the show. Your support means we can reach even more people, change more lives, and reach even higher highs. Thank you so much again for taking the time to tune in today. Until the next time, I'm Matt Roberts, and this has been the Evolution Lab.